Anything before we bring the jury back?
Recording in progress.
I don't believe so. No.
All right, let's bring the jury in. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. Mr. Lockhart, you may continue.
Mr. Etheridge, could you key up timestamp 147 and play that, please?
And that was after he ran outside the woods. Caught him, pulled him back in, spanked him.
Forgot to lock the door.
Could you hear, the transcript says unlock the door. I'll ask you to play that one more time. Mr. Board, to see,
On the transcript, are you?
it's page 166, line 6.
All right.
What else happened?
I went back to the bedroom, went to sleep.
And that was after he ran outside the woods. Caught him, pulled him back in, spanked him.
Forgot to lock the door.
And could you hear him say, forgot to lock the door?
Yes, sir, I do believe that's what he said.
I just wanted to correct that in the transcript. Mr. Etheridge, if you'll go to the next one.
But you do remember him spanking him and running outside, you catch him, I mean, you're telling this, you remember it all, that's right.
So what you just told me.
Pause it for a minute. Mr. Lockhart, if you would, I think the jury would be appreciative if you would tell us what page number you're going to so that when they're watching the video excerpt, they'll be able to refer it
Yes,
to
Your
the
Honor.
transcript. So what are we about to watch?
Going back to during the break, one of my assistants came over to help me.
You need your assistant.
And he lost
to come up
me.
and help. We'll let them come up and help you again if it expedites it.
If they know the page. Did you write the page down?
That's all right. If you just want them to see it, I thought it would be beneficial to them to be able to refer to the transcripts, and sometimes it's difficult to hear.
And it absolutely would. That's all right. We'll just skip on.
Probably in the 167 and the 168. Should just start at the very beginning of 168.
Okay.
All right, so page 168, we think will be what we're about to watch.
Yes, Your Honor. Line 1 through line 5.
All right.
But you do remember him spanking him and running outside, you catch him, I mean, you're telling this, you remember it all, that's right.
So what you just told me. Okay.
And there, can you hear him say, "I believe so"? Yeah,
Could I listen to it again?
absolutely.
But you do remember him spanking him and running outside, you catch him, I mean, you're telling this, you remember all this, right?
So
I believe, yeah.
So what you just told me, okay?
What I heard was, yeah, I believe, yeah.
Okay,
Like as if he stopped himself in the middle of a sentence. And
that's sufficient. During the course of your investigation, you learned that there was a gentleman who saw Joe Clyde Daniels standing out on or off the roadway. Is that correct?
I learned of a gentleman who described seeing someone, and he described the clothing that I had been told Joe Clyde was wearing that night. Yes, sir.
And you've in fact testified that this individual that saw Joe Clyde was Daniel McCormick. Is that correct?
Daniel McCormick was the individual who saw the person wearing the clothing that matched the description of Joe Clyde Daniels' clothing.
I'll show you a copy, if I may approach,
You may.
of your previous testimony in a preliminary hearing. And I'll ask you if you would to read lines 10 through 23, please.
Yes, sir. Question, and I want to stop you at that point now, Agent Boyd. In the course of your investigation, have you been able to determine whether there was any other person that saw Joe Clyde Daniels outside the night of April 4th or the early morning hours of April 4th? My answer was yes, sir, there was. The next question is, could you tell us about that? I said, yes, sir. Individual, I believe his first name was Daniel, last name McCormick, was on his way home from work. He stopped at the Love gas station, purchased some items on his way home. He was driving down Garners Creek Road and he saw a child, and the description that he provided was Joe Clyde Daniels. It was the exact description of his pajamas that he was wearing that night.
So you were asked, was there any other person who saw Joe Clyde Daniels outside the night of April 4th? And you testified, yes, it was Daniel McCormick.
That's paraphrasing, but yes, generally.
All right. You said, yes, sir, there was.
And I continued to elaborate on why I believe that to be true.
Right. So you believe that was Joe Clyde Daniels that Mr. McCormick saw based on your investigation and the description of the clothing?
Based on the description of the clothing and the information about that interview that had been relayed to me at the time, yes, sir.
All right. And you don't have any reason to disbelieve that now, do you?
I do. After subsequent analysis of, and when I say analysis, actually reading in detail Mr. McCormick's statement, he in fact indicates that it's a teenager. Obviously, he doesn't say Joe Clyde Daniels. I qualified my answer with saying he described the clothing, the pajamas. So the clothing that he described as what he saw did, in fact, yes, sir, match. At the time, I believe that was Joe Clyde Daniels, but upon subsequent examination of his actual statement, I did start to question that.
The description of the pajamas met to a T what Joe Clyde Daniels had on.
Based on what I had been told of what Joe Clyde Daniels was wearing, yes, sir, the skeletons.
And to your knowledge, no one else had pajamas that matched Joe Clyde Daniels out on the road that night?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
All right. Based on Mr. Daniels' confession, as far as observing his person and his intake photos, did he have marks or bruises on his fist or knuckles consistent with beating someone for an extended period of time?
Not that I observed, and I don't recall his booking photos, but to my memory, my recollection, I did not observe any injuries of that nature.
Did he have injuries to his legs consistent with walking through briars and weeds in a field?
Not that I ever observed. I believe he was wearing pants during my interview with him. And subsequent interviews, times that I've seen him, he was wearing pants as well.
And did you also testify at that same hearing in regard to a lady who said she observed someone meeting the description of of Joseph Daniels, my client, out on the road?
Yes, sir, I believe I did.
And she told you that she was looking at the woods, that this person was looking at the woods.
And forgive me, I don't recall exactly what she said,
Okay.
where he was looking. I recall, I would have to have my memory refreshed to her statement. I apologize.
We'll do that. And back to Mr. Daniels, did you make a point to observe his intake photos?
Not in any detail, no, sir.
Did you make a point to actually observe his legs and hands and arms?
I don't believe I did, no, sir.
All right.
His hands and arms, yes, sir, but legs, no, sir.
Would you have expected scratches on his legs if he's walking through briars at nighttime?
If he's walking through briars at nighttime, yes, sir, and in shorts, yes, sir, I would expect to see, possibly even in pants, depending on how thick or thin the pants are.
My approach again. Line 10 through 15, please, if you'd read that.
Yes, sir. I looked on his arms, looking for injuries as well as his legs, especially given the area that he said he disposed of the body, looking for cuts, because the areas where there were lots of thorns and high grass that would have resulted in cuts from those areas, and I did not observe any injuries to his arms or his legs.
So you did observe his legs also?
Well, I mean, yes, sir, not specifically looking for wounds or asking him to lift up his pants, but yes, sir, I mean, I was standing
The jury
with him.
can be confident based on your statements that you did not see wounds or scratches on his arms, hands, or legs.
Yes, sir, I saw no wounds on his hands, arms, or legs.
And did you go out to the field that he described to you at first?
Yes, sir.
And where was that located?
I believe that was located on McElhaney Road. I'd have to look back at, that maps of the search areas and stuff.
Was it a bush hog close down to the ground field, or was it grown up?
You're referring to like a mowed field?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a yard that would have weeds and briars and stuff in it.
It was a wild field that was not, well, there were lots of fields in that area, but I observed them not to be kept.
And he told you he used his wife's cell phone as a flashlight, is that correct?
Yes, sir, he did mention that in the, I believe that was in the typewritten interview.
Was there any evidence to corroborate that he used their cell phone in that area?
I don't know what evidence there would be, so I mean, no, sir,
I mean, Google.
but I can't think of any that.
Google location didn't mark her phone in that field, did it?
No, sir, I believe her location services were turned off on her cell phone.
Did Mr. Daniels make any type of confession or admission before you asked him if Crystal or Alex did it?
I don't recall any specific confession prior to that. I think there were several instances that I did mention Crystal or Alex, but if there's one specific that you're referring to, that might help narrow my answer down.
No, I'm just asking, did he make any confessions prior to the questions about Crystal and Alex?
He made no specific confessions prior to that, but I do believe the original story was evolving during that point, ultimately resulting in the confession that we obtained.
Do you think that might be relevant to why he would confess to doing it when he might be concerned about his wife or child in investigating?
That was never indicated to me by Mr. Daniels. I mean, again, speculating in isolation, other people might be different. Mr. Daniels, I can't speak to him exactly if that's what he could have done or would have done. However, I have seen some people look for opportunities to deflect on others, and that was not done by Mr. Daniels.
Mr. McCormick, excuse me, that gave a description of someone wearing exactly what Joe Clyde Daniels was wearing. Was he investigated in this case?
Well, it depends what you're referring to as investigated, but he was interviewed at least twice on different occasions. Agents went to his home, inspected his vehicle that he was in. I believe there was even maybe some other efforts made referring to Mr. McCormick. But as far as being the subject of the investigation, he never was.
And are you aware whether or not he caught a lot of flack in social media for not stopping to help the child?
I'm not aware of that.
Right. Did you go and talk to the next door neighbor, Matthew Ledford?
No, sir, I did not.
Do you know why no one talked to him?
Objection, Your Honor. Phrasing of the question, people did talk to Mr. Ledford.
I can,
During your handling as the,
would you like me to rule on the objection first?
no, I agree with him.
All right.
I've got to lay proper
Mr.
foundation.
Lockhart and I both sustain your objection, Mr. Chairman.
Handle this case before you were transferred. Are you aware of anyone interviewing Matthew Ledford?
Well, and to clarify, I requested a transfer, but as far as when interviewing Mr. Ledford, no, that was not the case.
And you requested a transfer to kind of advance your career, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's all.
It wasn't because you didn't like folks in Dixon.
Oh, no, not at all.
And if you don't mind me asking, where are you working now?
Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
During the time that you still had the case prior to your transfer, are you aware of anyone investigating a residence where a lady said that her child's boots were taken off the porch?
I don't recall the exact date that occurred, but I am aware of something along that nature happening. If that's the one, I don't know if that's the same one you're referring to or not. I believe it was in another county.
Actually in Dixon County.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking of another one then.
There-
But I
there-
have heard something about boots.
Okay. And were you aware of a report made over in the edge of Humphreys County in regard to,
Hold on just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, step across the aisle, please. We'll go back. We'll call you right back. Mr. Lockhart asked you a question outside the presence of the jury.
were you made aware of a report coming from a residence just over in the edge of Humphreys County in regard to a small boy in dirty pajamas?
Judge, I would object to that.
Sustain the objection, Mr. Lockhart. That's the second time that you have asked a question in this proceeding regarding a matter that I have ruled in pretrial motion hearings is not admissible. That would be an inappropriate question and would be violative of my order. So the reason that I took the precaution of sending the jury out is I did not want to have the same episode repeat itself where that is asked in the presence of the jury, only to have me then have to try to instruct them not to consider that. So you will not ask that question. Lastly, let me tell you that I've been handed, while the jury's out, I've been handed a question that the jurors have asked, and I don't mind letting, I think it's an appropriate question that either one of you can ask it. It's similar to what Mr. Lockhart has already asked, and he may want to just clarify it. The juror says, did the agent ask to lift up the pants leg? So I'm assuming that has to do with Mr. Lockhart's questions regarding the scratches and so forth on the legs. So I'll allow you to ask that question if you'd like and clarify that. So
I will. Before I do, Your Honor, the question I was asking was pursuant to your ruling on the motion. You said, Mr. Lockhart, I think again, it would seem to me that he can ask investigators during the trial of this case whether or not their investigation and if they received a report of a child in the area and what actions, if any, they took. That's all I'm going to ask is what actions they took.
all right, you're not going to repeat the statement of the mother supposedly saying her child had seen it. You're just going to ask about the report of the child.
Just the report of a young boy in dirty pajamas. That was.
Mr. Crouch, based on, and I recall that being my ruling, and I think with that limitation, I don't have a problem with him asking that limited question, but I wanted to make sure we didn't get beyond that. So, all right, let's bring the jury back. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. I apologize for sending you out on such short notice. Go ahead, Mr. Locker.
You had mentioned earlier about an out-of-county report. Do you recall an out-of-county report from over in the edge of Humphreys County in reference to a boy in dirty pajamas being seen?
Something of that nature, yes, sir. I believe that was reported to I would say the command post area, but there are probably more likely the Dixon County Sheriff's Office.
And do you know if dogs were sent out to try to pick the scent of that child up?
I don't know if dogs were.
Do you know if anyone went out and talked to sex offenders that lived in that area?
I don't know that. My recollection of that is that that county sheriff's office searched the area around where that report was made, and that wasn't made to me, so I can't comment too specifically on that.
One moment, please.
Yeah, sure.
Your Honor, the only other thing I want to do is make an exhibit of the transcript of the preliminary hearing, but I need to remove all my stickers and stuff from it first.
Do you have any opposition?
I have no opposition to components of the transcript that were passed today in this hearing. There's multiple witnesses.
Number one, I don't think this witness is authenticated.
Only Agent Boyd's testimony, no one else.
Well, if I could finish, I don't think that that this witness has authenticated the transcript in any way. He's just simply been asked specific questions about it and has responded to those specific questions. So those questions, the portions of the transcript that he was asked about can be made a copy and made an exhibit. We'll make it as a late filed exhibit. But I don't believe that this agent has authenticated the entire transcript that would allow the entire transcript, even the entire transcript of his testimony, because there were many other extraneous issues.
I'll call someone in from General Sessions to authenticate it.
That's fine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Mr. Crouch?
Agent Boyd, Mr. Locker has been asking you several questions about only giving the defendant two choices in answering your questions. Correct?
Yes, sir.
The defendant didn't even have to be talking to you, right?
I'm sorry. Could you say that again? I couldn't hear the first
Did the
part.
defendant even have to speak with you?
No, sir. He didn't.
How did he get to meet with you?
He drove himself.
Was he locked in a room with you?
No, sir.
Was he in handcuffs?
No, sir.
Was he forced to continue answering questions?
No, sir. He wasn't.
Could he have gotten up and walked out?
At any time, yes, sir.
I mean, he was voluntarily engaging in your questioning.
Yes, sir.
So when asked how many options he had, is the correct answer limitless?
Yes, sir.
He didn't have to be there.
Correct.
He drove there.
Yes, sir. He did.
Okay. Now, Mr. Locker also asked several questions in regard to you introducing, I guess, theories or evidence to the defendant in this interview process. But let's go to page 54 of the transcript, if you have that. You with me?
Yes, sir.
I think it's Mr. Faulkner on line 21. What's the question?
He pushed it over there, climbed up, unlocked it, and then pushed it back out of the way to open the door.
And the answer?
Yeah.
I mean, is that the defendant's answer as to how he believes Joe Clyde got out the door?
Yes, sir. That's, I believe that's Agent Faulkner's summary of that.
The defendant is asking you and Agent Faulkner to believe that a 5-year-old did what with a coffee table?
Pushed it over to the door, climbed up, unlocked the padlock on the door, and then pushed it back out of the way to open the door.
So, Mr. Lockhart asked you specific questions about statements that you believed and didn't believe of the defendant. Did you believe that his 5-year-old son had done that?
No, sir.
So it was more than just introducing cell phone data. It was the entire premise of the defendant's explanation.
Yes, sir.
If you'll turn to page 115. Mr. Lockhart asked you a specific question about Agent Faulkner stating we're going backwards. You see that on
Yes,
line
sir.
18? Now, we're going backwards, and Mr. Lockhart asked you a question about his repeated denials leading up to this point. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. You
Now,
did.
go back again one more time to page 104. You with me?
Yes, sir.
What does the defendant tell you and Agent Faulkner beginning on lines 19?
Line 19, okay, now when I know they've got the lock and they probably already ran the prints on it, so, which I don't, they probably found the key, but I didn't know where the padlock was. I moved the key a little bit, but I did not let him escape the house.
I mean, yes, he may be denying some things, but early on in this story, he's admitting to putting the lock in the key and moving it a little.
Yes, sir.
So is the defendant's story already changing?
Yes, sir, it is. He's now mentioning touching the key that night.
I moved the key a little bit. And what is your thought process then?
I believe he's trying to explain away why we might find DNA or fingerprints.
Okay. Now, what color shorts was the defendant wearing?
They were a red color.
And what color shorts did the witness, Jenny Jones, identify as the defendant wearing on the night of the homicide? And you may not be familiar with her testimony. I guess you're not.
I'm not familiar with her testimony. I've read her statements. I'd have to have my memory refreshed to her statement, but I'm not familiar with her testimony.
That's fine. And who did she identify as being in the roadway or on the road?
In her statement at the time, she stated Joseph Daniels. She was very confident in that.
And speaking of collecting evidence and blood, who told you in this interview that he had washed the clothing that he was wearing when the homicide occurred?
Joseph Daniels initially stated that it was washed, and I believe he even said, well, I didn't wash it, but he said that the shirt had been washed.
And where was that shirt recovered?
In the laundry room.
And if there had have been DNA evidence on that shirt and it gets washed, do you know what will happen?
In my experience, your likelihood of finding DNA evidence drastically goes away.
And Mr. Lockhart also said he was going to go back and address the questioning of you regarding the absence of blood, but he didn't. So what's on pages 183 and 184?
We discussed bleeding.
Okay, and let's talk specifically about blood. Line 21.
Line 21, I asked, where was he, meaning Joe Clyde, where was he bleeding from?
And the defendant's answer?
Joe Daniels says his legs.
And your next question?
He was bleeding from his legs, and Mr. Daniels nods his head, yes. I asked from what? Mr. Daniels says from me beating him, from landing on the table.
Okay, and then what's your next question?
From landing on the table?
And Mr. Daniels says what?
Mr. Daniels says just scratched. He had cut his leg on the table.
Okay, and what's your next question?
He cut his leg on the table when you threw him? Mr. Daniels responds, I didn't see any blood though.
And what's your response?
Okay.
And then Mr. Daniels?
Mr. Daniels states, when I woke up that morning, I didn't see any blood.
I mean, is there any answers from Mr. Daniels in this interview that there was a lot of blood in this house?
No, sir. In fact, Mr. Daniels states he didn't see any blood.
In reference to what occurred in the house, at any point in this interview, does the defendant say he was bleeding from his cheeks onto the carpet or onto the coffee table or onto the couch or anywhere in the house?
No, sir.
The references to blood on his face occurred when?
In this interview, but the context of the blood on his face was specifically relating to putting the body, disposing of the body out in the fields, as he was saying.
And again, I lost my place. You were asked about a black belt in karate. Was the defendant a black belt?
My understanding was he was very involved in karate. I believe it was Taekwondo, and I had heard that he was a black belt.
Okay. And how much of this did Alex see, according to the defendant?
Mr. Daniels told me everything.
Pass the witness.
Any further?
Yes, Your Honor.
While they're doing that, one of the jurors has asked a question, and I was going to go ahead and ask it of you. Earlier, you testified about observing anything on the arms or legs of the defendant. Did you ask him to lift his pants leg up or anything to observe his legs?
No, sir, I don't recall doing that. There was a question in my preliminary hearing that I stated I observed his legs, and if I did do that, I mean, that was right after this had all happened. And if I said I observed his legs, I believe I did, but I don't recall specifically asking him to raise his pant legs.
All right, thank you.
But you have no doubt that close in time you observed his legs. You wouldn't have testified that you did if you didn't.
Correct.
And he had no scratches or marks.
None that I observed, no, sir.
May I approach?
You may.
Back to the preliminary hearing transcript, line 19 through 24, if you would read that portion of your testimony.
Do you want me to read the question before it?
Please.
The question is right. If she's told him what to say to protect her, then we still don't know if it was her that left with the phone or Joseph Daniels. And my answer during the preliminary hearing was we have no information to show that she was outside of the home.
I'm sorry.
That's
Line 19 right here?
yes, sir.
Okay.
I was just reading the full response.
Okay. All right.
We have no information to show that she and witnessed Joseph Daniels outside on that road in the early mornings of April 4th, 2018. She stated that he was standing there. When she drove by with her headlights, he froze or appeared to freeze and would not look up at her. He faced the woods.
All right. And that was relatively soon after she made a report, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I would say that.
Certainly sooner than today.
Yes, sir. I would agree.
And so she told you that she was not facing the traffic in the road. That this man she believed to be Joseph Daniels was facing the woods.
She did not make that statement to me. That was my summary and paraphrasing of her, what I recalled and believed her statement to be. Yes, sir.
But you wouldn't just make something up. When you testified, she said that he was facing the woods and not turn around toward the roadway. You believe that to be true?
Yes, sir. That's how it was described to me.
All right.
Agent Boyd, excuse me, Agent Boyd, so that was your testimony?
Yes, sir.
That's not something that Jenny Jones told you directly?
No, sir.
That was your summary of her statement?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to see her statement?
Yes, sir, I would.
And Madam Clerk, I would ask that you provide the statement of Jenny Jones, and I don't know the exhibit
It
number.
would be 160.
And Agent Boyd, you've been handed exhibit number 160. Can you identify that document?
It says typewritten statement of Jenny Jones.
Okay, and please read the statement for us. And this is the actual statement of Ms. Jones.
Type written statement of Jenny Jones, 1450 Garners Creek Road, Dixon, Tennessee, April 23rd, 2018. I, Jenny Jones, have voluntarily provided the following information to TBI Assistant Special Agent in Charge Joe Craig. The information is related to the ongoing investigation into the death of Joe Clyde Daniels. I understand that I am not obligated to give this or any other statement, and I have not been promised anything in return for providing this information. I currently work for Ginger's Family Bonding and was contacted on April 3rd, 2018 to write a bond for Kimberly Cunningham, who was incarcerated at the Williamson County Jail in Franklin, Tennessee. I completed my required paperwork and left the jail with Cunningham, who needed a ride home at or around 11 p.m. After leaving the Williamson County Jail, I made 2 stops. The first was at the Mapco Express at Downs and Highway 96. This was to go to the bathroom and purchase some items. I then drove to Cunningham's residence in Fairview, where I waited for someone to bring a key so that Cunningham could enter her home. This took about 10 to 15 minutes. I left the Fairview area, traveling home by way of Highway 96, then turning on to Highway 70. I traveled west on Highway 70 to Garners Creek Road. I recall approaching the section of guardrail near my residence, and I observed a man standing next to the guardrail on the east side of the road. He was wearing, there's quotation marks around, colorful clothes, and was standing perfectly still and never looked at me as I drove past him. I was traveling approximately 30 miles an hour as I drove by him. The area below the guardrails has a dry or washed out creek bed. Agent Craig told me that the guardrails were approximately 1 mile from the Daniels residence on Garners Creek Road. I called the Dixon Police Department on April 8, 2018 at 1356 to report what I had seen. This was after I saw the news and a picture of Joseph Daniels, and I am positive that the person I saw the early morning hours of April 4, 2018 was Joseph Daniels. It's signed Jenny Jones, 4/23/18, 1555, I believe is what it says. Witnesses Joe Craig and I believe that other witness is Joel Wade, is another TBI agent.
Thank you. No further questions.
So in that report, she doesn't say whether she was facing the woods or the road. Is that correct?
Reference the report one more time, I'm sorry. The interview says he was wearing colorful clothes and was standing perfectly still and never looked at me as I drove past him.
So it doesn't say whether he was facing the guardrail facing the woods or standing at a guardrail looking out at the road.
That's correct. It says, and never looked at me.
And she doesn't say that this person was wearing red shorts either, does she?
No, sir, I don't believe she does. She just mentions colorful clothes.
Based on your information and investigation, what color shirt was Joseph Daniels wearing this night?
Black with bright green on it.
All right. And so she testified the shirt was red, white, and blue. That would not be consistent with his shirt that we believe he was wearing. Is that correct?
If that's what she, well, there was red, white, and blue on the shirt, so I would have to say it's consistent. I mean, it's not inconsistent.
Right.
There's red on, and well, I don't recall. There may not be blue, but there's definitely red, white. So I mean, I can't say it's not consistent.
Right. If she testified red, white, blue, and not black, red, white, and blue, and didn't say that she saw him wearing red shorts, that's not real close to what he was wearing, is it?
Again, consistent is not exact. Consistent is close to, and there's varying degrees of that. I didn't hear what she testified to and how she described it, so I really don't feel that I can answer that question accurately.
You saw his red shorts.
Yes, sir.
They would be pretty bright and visible if 282-pound man's wearing those shorts standing by a guardrail.
I think those shorts on anybody would be
Right.
fairly visible.
And she never gives that description.
No, she does not say red shorts, no, sir.
That's all the questions I have.
Ralph, anything further?
No, sir, thank you.
Thank you, Agent Boyd. You may step down.
Yes, sir.
All right, my understanding is, Mr. Crouch, that it is 7:15, and you have two other witnesses, both of whom are going to be very lengthy in time, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we're going to need to go ahead and adjourn for the day so we can get you back to your hotel. And those transcripts, if you will just hand them to the bailiff as you exit, then they'll be here for you whenever the appropriate time comes. Is there any, well, let me let the jury exit. All right, is there anything that we need to address before tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock? Then all right, then we'll adjourn tomorrow until tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock a.m.
All rise.
Recording stopped.
Whatever 69. 169? Okay. Yeah, so he's gonna authenticate that for you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.